Thank you for that reading, and thanks for that welcome, James. And as I said before, it's a great pleasure to be here and to have this opportunity to share with you and to celebrate Axel's baptism this morning, which is a great thing indeed. Well, I wonder, have you ever had a brush with fame? You know what I mean by that? Those often extraordinary circumstances where you suddenly find yourself unexpectedly face to face with a famous person in a completely unexplained way. Anyone had one of those? Just raise your hand. Oh, look, see, yeah, there's quite a few. I've had a couple. Probably the one that would make most sense, maybe, looking around. I'm looking at the demographic here this morning. But for those of you who know the now deceased Spike Milligan, comedian, writer, poet, you know, and I went to see Spike Milligan at a show at the Enmore Theatre, what feels like 100 years ago now, which was a great show and everything else. And my friends and I who went, we were just walking around the back of the theatre on our way back to where we parked the car, and lo and behold, out popped from the stage door Spike Milligan. And he actually stopped us to have a chat with us, which was fantastic. And I just happened to have my book of Goon Show scripts with me and managed to pull that out, and I've still got the signed copy of that book that he did that night. And that was just one of those little serendipitous opportunities. There we go, there's Spike. So I wonder what your brush with fame would have been. So we can have accidental encounters with all sorts of famous people, but did you know there's a theory that says that we are actually far closer to all sorts of famous and not so famous people than we think? And that theory is actually called 6 degrees of separation. That may ring a bell for some of you. The concept was proposed back in the mid-60s by a group of sociologists in Columbia University in the States. And the theory is that every person on the planet is connected to every other person by no more than 6 other people. Hence the 6 degrees of separation. It means that there are only 6 degrees or steps, if you like, between me and Joe Biden. It means that there are only 6 degrees or steps between me and a nomadic herdsman in Afghanistan. And the theory says that I know someone or have a connection with someone who in turn has a connection or a knowledge or a relationship with someone else, and so on, but to a maximum of 6 people. The trick is, of course, figuring out who those 6 people are. And all this got me thinking, because it's actually pretty amazing that I can be connected to everyone else in the world in that way. So I'm connected to Bruce Springsteen. I'm connected to the Queen of England. And I'm connected to Taylor Swift. And of course, if he was still alive, I would be connected to someone like Stephen Hawking. And it means that even young Axel here this morning is connected somehow with all sorts of great and famous and ordinary people. The problem is figuring out who those 6 people are. In fact, when it comes to linking myself to someone like Joe Biden, I wouldn't even have a clue where to start. I don't even know that many Americans. The connection may be there, but I've got no idea what it is. Now, we're here this morning to witness Kurt and Bernadette's promises today to raise Axel to know and to love God. But it seems to me that lots of people often struggle when it comes to the idea of knowing God. Like we do about this whole 6-degree theory. That is, people can acknowledge that God is there, but they're not sure how to find him. And certainly they're unsure about how they can know him. They feel like it's a bit like the 6-degree theory, that it is possible to know God, but they've got no idea what the steps are, or even how to start. And yet it seems that a lot of people do want to try. And in fact, in our Bible reading this morning, that seems to me to speak directly to this question. And Jesus really does hit the nail on the head with his answer, particularly in verse 6, which we'll come back to. And just in case you think in a secular culture like ours that people have just given up on God and of the idea of knowing God or even accepting the fact that he exists, it was really interesting that just this month, the Centre for Public Christianity surveyed 1,000 Australians and asked them, amongst a whole range of questions, as to whether they believed in God or the supernatural and whether they believed in life after death. And the results were interesting because 57.9% said yes or possibly to belief in God, and then 59.6%, so very similar, said the same for life after death. Now, for those of us who've been around a little while, those figures are much lower than they would have been in times past. But these numbers still mean that more than half the adult population of Australia claim to have some connection to God. So probably some connection to one religion or another. And so a lot of people go through life knowing or believing that God is there, but struggle about what that relationship actually looks like. Many people go through life thinking that it's just all too hard to figure out the complex degrees of separation between them and God. And so they go through life thinking that there is some hidden connection, some trick that they need to figure out if they want to know God. And of course, so often that is what religion seems to be all about. And I think that's really sad because the fact is that religion is people realising that things aren't right with God and then setting off to try and do something about that themselves. And we see this in every culture, every race, every language, every people group on the planet. People trying to reach up to God, trying to be good enough, feeling like they are somehow acceptable to him. And if we were, I guess, to sum that thinking up, we could say that so often religion is all about doing. Do this, do that, say this, don't say that, pay this, wear that, eat this, don't eat that. It is like a list of do's and don'ts, of rules and regulations, and that people convince themselves that if they do these things, if they keep all these rules, well, they may, hopefully, end up in a good relationship with God. So it seems to me that religion is usually about people trying to have a good relationship with God, but somehow it's a relationship on our terms. Religion seems to be about people trying to reach up to find God, trying to deserve or earn a relationship with him. But you've only got to think about this for a minute to see the problem with that. And that is a relationship where you have to earn acceptance is really not a good relationship. I mean, imagine if you were only loved or accepted if you performed in a certain way or jumped through certain hoops. Imagine someone who only loved you when you picked up your clothes off the bedroom floor, or you mowed the grass, or you remembered to take the garbage out. Actually, that sort of sounds like me when my kids were living at home as teenagers. But, that's conditional love, isn't it? That's not acceptance. It's not a really good basis for a relationship. And it's the same with God and us. God really is not all that interested in our feeble attempts to try and be good enough and to try and earn a relationship with him. Which is, I guess, why so often religion tends to breed guilt and mistrust and hypocrisy and pride and manipulation and all those bad things that we often hear about. So I want to just suggest to you this morning that religion is not the way to have a good relationship with God, because God is not religious in that sense. What he is interested in is relationships. And again, we know that many people in our culture, in our society, have this idea that Christians are people who think they're good. But in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. Christians realise that we are not good people and that we need God's forgiveness. Which is one reason why, of course, we said that prayer of confession at the start of our gathering this morning. Christians aren't people who think they're good. They're actually people who know that they're not. They know that doing religious things, like going to church on a Sunday, doesn't make you, doesn't build a relationship with God, doesn't make you a Christian, any more than standing in a garage makes you a car. Rather, the incredible God that is revealed in the Bible actually wants to have a relationship with us, but not one that is based upon us trying to reach some level of goodness or performing some ritual like baptism, but simply and solely through what Jesus has done in his death for us. That is, him paying the price for our rebellion against God. And based on the forgiveness that we can have through God's incredible mercy, his amazing grace to us, we can have a good relationship with God because it's on his terms. And that's the big difference between religion and Christianity. Religion is all about doing. Christianity is all about what has been done by Jesus. And so the Bible is really telling us that there is just one degree of separation, and that is what Jesus addressed in that reading for us this morning. One degree of separation between us and God. So if you want to know God, then all you have to do is actually get to know Jesus. There is no other way, in fact, of knowing God. No other degrees or degree of separation. And that means that, of course, the opposite is true, isn't it? That if you don't know Jesus, then you really don't know God. So the key verse in our reading, the one I've been sort of talking about, is, of course, verse 6. There it is. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And if you really knew me, you would know my Father as well." And I just want to say that simple truth is something that really is worth celebrating today. Because Axel, young Axel over there, he hasn't got a relation, he knows his name. He's not going to have a relationship with God just because James will sprinkle some water on him in a few minutes. He's not going to have a relationship with God because James says some special prayers over him. Now, one day, Axel is going to have to make a decision for himself on what kind of relationship he wants with God. But for now, his need for forgiveness is actually met by the relationship that his parents, Kurt and Bernadette, have with Jesus. Which is why they will make the promises and declarations today on Axel's behalf. The day will come when Axel can change that and take those, make those promises, make those declarations for himself. Now, for Axel, your job is to support Kurt and Bernadette and pray that today is an important first step in the process of Axel getting to know God. And that Kurt and Bernadette will be helping them along that path every step of the way, along with the godparents. Now, for the rest of us here today, the question of the day really is to ask ourselves, where am I in my relationship with God? Because if there's any uncertainty there, then this is as good an opportunity as any to try and address that. Like John 14 says, Jesus is the only way that we can come into a relationship with God. And if that's something that you think is worth exploring, then I know that James would love to have a conversation with you at some point. I'd be very happy to, hanging around afterwards. I'm sure there's a lot of other people as well. And I know that this church has got a course starting in a couple of weeks called Explore Life. And it will do exactly that. It will help people who attend that to work out how they can have a relationship with God. You can pick up one of these flyers out there in the foyer on the way out. It starts on Thursday, April 29th. Called Explore Life, and it's going to be held right here. But what a great celebration we can have today, acknowledging God's gift of Axel to his family, but also celebrating the fact that each one of us can come into a special relationship with God through knowing Jesus. What a great truth that is. Amen.